Welcome to part 8 of this tutorial series. Here I'll show you how to add a little button to our form, click it, input an ID number, and when you hit OK, have it delete data from our data storage worksheet over here. And don't forget, on teachexcel.com we've got a premium version of this course available where I show you how to do lots of extra stuff. Now let's get started with this tutorial. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to Teach Excel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. Go ahead and watch the previous 7 tutorials if you haven't already, because I'm not going to cover any of that stuff again. Now, deleting data from the worksheet is not too difficult now that we know how to locate data on the Data tab. So if you watch the previous 2 or 3 tutorials, a lot of the code that we're going to use in our macro is going to seem very familiar to you. We're basically just going to put a few of those pieces together. The first thing that we have to do here is to add a button. And I think I showed you how to do that about 2 tutorials ago. So I may breeze through it really quickly here. We're going to add a delete button. So let's go ahead first, unprotect the sheet. Remember the password 123456. Do not use that as your own password. Zoom out a bit. I do want to make sure I go ahead and view everything in the worksheet again. And if you already remember these steps for adding the button, you can skip ahead a minute or 2. Because first we want to make the data visible so we can see everything. Okay. Now let's go down here. This time I'm going to add a row. We'll see if it expands the buttons or not. And it does. So back up 1. Here's a little thing that you can do to your buttons. Not that one. Right click the button. Go to Size and Properties, which is currently off of the screen. Where is it? I do not like Excel 2016. In previous versions, a little floating window will pop up, and I believe you go to the Properties tab, and then you click Do Not Move or Size with Cells. That's going to make sure our button stays the same. Now let's go to the Submit button. Oops, right click, but be careful where you right click on the edge, okay. Size and Properties, don't move or size with cells, okay. Now, I should be able to add a row without an issue. Perfect. Let's go ahead, right click this guy, right click him again, go to copy, then hit Control V for paste. Now let's move our new button down. Just use the arrow keys so we can keep everything lined up. And click in here, delete it, delete record. And let's go ahead and change the color of this button. So make sure the button is selected. You can use the right mouse clicker to select it so it doesn't click it. Go to Format, Shape, Fill, I believe. Don't want to make you too bright. That looks good enough. Okay. Click away. Okie dokie. Now let us zoom out. Let's first actually right click. I've already created the macro, so I'm going to go ahead and assign it here. Right click the button, go to Assign Macro. The macro is called Delete Data. Hit OK. Click away. OK. Now we got our buttons. Rehide our data, and I only showed this data, if you recall from the previous tutorial, just to make sure we weren't messing anything up. Make sure you don't have any data down here that's getting shifted around or anything like that. Now let's go ahead and make it the same color as the background again. Okay. Go to the View tab, remove grid lines, headings, and the formula bar. Go ahead and click the Submit button. Now what that has done, it has automatically locked our worksheet, so we can't click anything else again. So don't worry about the failure for the validation because we did not enter any data, no worries. Okay, now we have our new button in our form. We have our worksheet re-protected once again. Everything is kept safe and nice and neat. And now once you have the button, you have a couple different decisions to make. The most important of which is how do you want this to function? So we used the Submit button from the previous tutorial to enter a new record as well as update an old record. For the delete button, do we want to first display a record here so we can verify it's the record we want to delete, then pull the value from the ID cell here and delete that record? Or do we want to have a pop-up window appear just like we have for Find Record, so we can input an ID and then when we hit OK, have it delete the record? So I've decided that we're going to use a pop-up window like this. What it's going to allow is it's going to allow us to first find a record like this, see if we want to delete the record, but it's going to make us do one extra step. So to delete the record, it'll function like this button, so I'll click it again. We have to click it again, re-input the number, and re-hit OK. Because if you delete data using this method, you're not going to be able to hit Control-Z and undo it. So you have to be very careful with what you delete. Now there are different ways that you can do that, and I'll show you how to do that in the premium tutorials on Teach Excel. They're a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. So let us make sure everything looks hunky-dory. Okay. Now let's go to the VBA window, Alt F11. Open up our project, password 123456, enter. Go to Modules. Remember to download this workbook so you can follow along. It's going to make life easier. As you know, I like to go through the macro that's already written. In Module 5, we have the Delete Data macro. Very simple, just going to delete an entry from the data repository worksheet. Let's zoom in and talk about it. First things first, you're going to notice a lot of similarities with the other macros that we have here. Up here, we've got some declared variables. Of course, we have our source sheet, our data sheet, our search value, data ID column, and then here for range RNG, we use that when we search for the value. I decided to declare that here because anytime that I'm going to use the range and actually type it out, it makes it a little bit easier if you declare it up here. I'll explain that in a moment. So once again, declare your source sheet and your data sheet. Source sheet will be the form worksheet, data sheet, data worksheet. I cover this a lot in other tutorials, so I'm not really going to spend much time on it. Data ID column, very important here. Remember, this is the column that uniquely identifies each record on your data worksheet. So here in column A. So first we type data sheet, then the range that we'd like to reference. And remember, if you are in a version of Excel that's before 2007, you're going to have to do something like this. You can't just reference the entire column. Okay, now here's where we figure out how we want to get our search value. In, I believe, the previous tutorial, the search value was gotten by a simple range reference here from the form. So it just came from this guy right here. Then 2 tutorials ago, where we found the value and we displayed it in the form, it came from an input box just like this one right here. Here we're going back to the input box. If you want to do it by getting it from the form, just watch the previous tutorial, or all you really have to do is just replace this with something that says source sheet.range and then the cell you want to get the value from. So do make sure you change the title. Here we have input and ID because that's what you want to input, but the title is delete record because that's what we're going to delete. Now remember, once you get the search value, you need to check if a value was actually input because the user can hit cancel or close or escape. So all we do is check if the search value does not equal, remember, just a less than or greater than sign does not equal VB null string, which basically just means empty. So if the search value is not empty, okay, we got something. So let's continue down here. And this if statement right here encloses the rest of the macro. So if there is no search value, then none of this stuff runs. You can see the if statement ends right here at the very end of the macro. So it just encloses everything. All right, so we're here, we have our search value, and we're going to go ahead and use the find method once again. So remember, for the find method, the first thing you have to do, tell it where to find stuff. So we have our data ID column variable set to where our IDs are located. Then we tell it to find something. Well, it's got to find a search value. And then these options, which I briefly covered in previous tutorials, They aren't terrifically important for the vast majority of the cases when you're going to want to use this, but if you want to learn more, I have a link here to Microsoft's website that'll explain it. The most important one maybe is the look at for Excel whole, and if you want to match case or not, so if capital letters are important or not important. Now, this is the guy that does the actual search, but you need to store the result in something. So we store it in the RNG value. So since we're storing an object in here, we're storing the range object, we have to type set in front of it. So we set the range object RNG, this variable, equal to the result of the find method. So it finds the value, it finds a cell reference, a range reference, and it puts it in this guy right here. Then what we need to do, check if it found it. Now I kind of tried to explain if it found a value. Now I kind of tried to explain this in a previous tutorial, but I don't even think I'm going to here. Copy this and paste it. Because the more I try to explain it, the more confusing it sounds. If not range is nothing, then. I mean, programmers, it's like they just want to make your life more confusing, basically. So just copy this guy and paste it. And if you make it inside of this check, then it found a record. If you want to put something else here, if you didn't find a record, as we've done in previous tutorials, you can put else, and then down here, record not found. You could even output a message that says that, record was not found. So this is one option that you can actually do here. If you want to input a message box to tell the user, no, I couldn't find what you're trying to delete, sorry, you can put that right here. In this example, I don't really think it's necessary, so I did not include it. But now that we found a record, we want to do something with a record. We want to delete it. It's so easy to delete it. So all you have to do, type the range reference, entire row, dot delete. Now the reason I declared RNG here instead of the other macros, so I declared it up here as a range, is because it makes our life easier when we actually want to work with it. So before, all we did was type RNG.row. That's no big deal, but when you want to type a lot of extra things, it's helpful to have this little code hint right here. And the code hint only works if you declare the variables at the top of the macro. So when I start typing dot, entire what? Entire column? No, entire row. There we go. Okay. So it kind of helps you figure it out. What do I want to do? Do I want to clear it, remove it, delete? Oh yeah, delete. Okay, delete looks good. Okay, bam. So it helps you to fill it out so that you don't have to remember all of this stuff. It makes life easier. So now we can take that away. But this is all you have to do to delete the row. Note, entire row. So it deletes the entire row. So here, that's why we only had to give it a single cell reference. So this range reference is going to be something like A2 or A3 or A4, but we want to delete the entire row, not just A2. So basically it says, hey, go to cell A2 on our data sheet, then select the entire row, not just cell A2, but the entire row 2, and delete it. So that's why we have entire row here. Very, very important. But that also means this shouldn't be a problem if you're following these tutorials, but it also means that you shouldn't have anything extra over here unrelated to your data table. So occasionally people will say, great, this is my data table, no problem. I can just put a bunch of random data over here as well. Don't do that. This data tab is meant to be kind of like a database. It is only for data storage. It is for nothing else. In the end, you can hide this worksheet tab and never, ever, ever view it. So don't put other stuff over here. However, if you really want to, or your boss really wants you to, because you know you got to do what your boss says, then down here, you simply need to have the first column of your data set and the last column of your data set. And you could also do the first row and the last row. That way, you will never ever go out of the bounds of your data set. Now that's beyond the scope of this tutorial, and I'm not going to cover it because you should do things like I told you for the data worksheet and you won't run into this problem. Okay, now let's go down here. Once you've done this, by the way, you just deleted the data. That's great. You're officially done with data deletion. But remember, you want to make your stuff a bit usable. So that's why we once again have this clear data section. So the clear data section is just going to make sure that your form is empty. And that's all that it does. And then here we have the end if once again, which just closes this guy right here, which makes sure there was a search value. So the delete data macro is not very big, not very complicated, just kind of a combination of the last few things that we've done here. So now we can hit Alt F11, go back to the form worksheet, zoom in a little bit. So if I didn't have the clear data at the very end of the macro that I just showed you, the second that I hit delete record here and I delete Gamora's record, her record will still appear in the form right here. So that's what I meant about usability. It will be removed from the data tab, but it'll still appear here, and that can cause confusion. So let's go ahead and try it out now. I like this idea, by the way, of first finding the record, making sure it's the one you want to remove, and then hitting delete record. So we'll do that, delete record. What's the ID? I can double check it right now. Gamora's ID, 333. Hit OK. Don't worry about the validation. Go to the data, and it is gone. Now let's go back to the form. Let's find a record. Let's say 222. Judge Dredd. You know, Thanos, he really likes killing people, so he's getting rid of all of his competition at the workplace here. 222. Okay. Judge Dredd gone. Go to the data tab. Now, two important things there. First, we deleted one that was at the very bottom of the list, but that's easy peasy. The next was Judge Dredd was in row 2 and Thanos was in row 3. So it's really good to test deleting a record that's in the middle of the data set so you can make sure that the entire row is deleted and everything else moves up. And now, after all this time and all this work on this form, we have got a form that has a quite sophisticated level of data validation for Microsoft Excel, I'd say, where it'll check all of our form fields, limit what we can input into it. Then we can input a record onto the other worksheet, the data worksheet. We can update it as well now if we input the same ID. We can search for records and view the results in the form. And now we can delete records. And all of this while having a nice, beautiful, protected form that is idiot-proof, coworker-proof, bulletproof. So that pretty much covers it for making a pretty darn good form in Excel that can do a lot of things. Now there's a lot more that I was unable to cover in this tutorial series, and that's going to be covered in the premium series for the bulletproof or idiot-proof forms in Excel on teachexcel.com. But for now, you've got a fully working coworker-proof form in Excel. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.